Hello, everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I'm a 911 emergency dispatcher at the Jefferson County Communications Center in Birmingham, Alabama. Or at least I was until I submitted my resignation 3 weeks ago. You can call me Sarah Mitchell if you want. Though most people in the dispatch center just called me Mitch during my 14 years there. I've handled everything you can imagine in emergency communications: car accidents, medical emergencies, domestic violence calls, fires, robberies, and every kind of crisis that people face when they dial those 3 numbers. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one call that made me question everything I thought I knew about my job and ultimately led me to leave the profession entirely. Jefferson County Communications handles emergency calls for Birmingham and the surrounding metropolitan area. It's a state-of-the-art facility built in 2008 with 32 dispatch positions that process over 400,000 emergency calls per year. During my time there, I worked primarily overnight shifts, 11:00 p.m. to 7:00 a.m., because I preferred the pace and the types of situations we typically handled during those quiet hours. Night shifts in emergency dispatch are unpredictable. You might have 4 hours of routine medical calls and minor traffic incidents followed by 3 hours of back-to-back emergencies. Or you might be handling critical situations from the moment you put on your headset. The night of March 8, 2023, was shaping up to be one of the busier ones. It was a Tuesday, which usually meant we'd see our share of domestic disputes, medical emergencies from elderly residents, and the occasional break-in or disturbance call. But the weather had been mild and clear, the kind of night that brings people out and sometimes leads to more activity than usual. I had been on shift since 11:00 p.m., and by 3:20 a.m., we had already processed dozens of calls. A teenager with chest pains that turned out to be anxiety, an elderly man who had fallen in his bathroom and needed assistance, and a house fire on the south side that required multiple units. I was reviewing incident reports from earlier calls when my console lit up at 3:47 a.m. The incoming call indicator showed a landline number from the Homewood area, a quiet residential neighborhood known for its tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes. I put on my headset and answered with our standard greeting that I had spoken thousands of times over the years. "Wens, what's your emergency?" There was silence on the other end, but I could hear breathing. Not heavy breathing or distressed panting, just the quiet, steady rhythm of someone who was there but not speaking. "Hello, this is 911. Can you hear me? Do you need help?" More silence, then finally a voice. It was a woman, and she sounded young, maybe in her 20s or early 30s. But there was something about her tone that immediately put me on alert. She spoke in a whisper, barely audible, as if she was afraid someone might overhear her. "I need help," she said. "But I don't know if you can help me with this." "Ma'am, I'm here to help. What's your situation? Are you injured? Are you in danger?" "I'm not injured," she replied, still whispering. "But something is very wrong. Something is happening in my house, and I don't understand what it is." This was the kind of call that could go in several directions. She might be experiencing a mental health crisis. She could be in danger from an intruder. Or she might be dealing with a domestic situation where she couldn't speak freely. My training kicked in, and I began following our protocols for ambiguous emergency calls. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name and your location?" "My name is Emma Hartley. I'm at 2847 Canterbury Road in Homewood." I immediately entered her information into our system and began the process of dispatching units to her location while keeping her on the line. The address came up in our database as a single-family residence with no prior emergency calls or incidents reported. "Emma, I'm going to send officers to your location to check on you. Can you tell me what's happening in your house that's concerning you?" There was another long pause, and I could hear what sounded like footsteps in the background, slow and deliberate, as if someone was walking around her house. "The sounds," she whispered. "There are sounds coming from upstairs, but I live alone. I've always lived alone. And the sounds, they're not normal sounds. They're like someone is moving furniture around, but it's 3:00 in the morning, and there's no one here but me." "Emma, are you somewhere safe in your house right now? Can you get to a room where you can lock the door? I'm in my kitchen. I can see the stairs from here, and no one has come down. But the sounds keep happening. Every night for the past week, the same sounds, always between 3 montus and 4 a.m. This information changed my assessment of the situation. If this had been happening for a week, it was less likely to be an immediate break-in or home invasion. But Emma's fear was genuine, and something was clearly distressing her enough to call 911 in the middle of the night. Emma, I have officers on their way to you. They should be there in about 5 minutes. Have you checked upstairs during the day to see if anything looks different or out of place? Yes, she said. And for the first time, her voice carried a note of confusion rather than just fear. That's the thing. I've checked every room, every closet, every space upstairs. Nothing is ever moved, nothing is out of place. It's like the sounds are happening, but they're not affecting anything physical. I could hear the approaching sirens through her phone, which meant our units were getting close to her location. But as I listened to Emma describe her situation, something about it struck me as unusual in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Emma, the officers are almost there. I can hear the sirens through your phone. When they knock on your door, I want you to let them in and show them your identification. They're going to want to check your house to make sure everything is secure. Okay, she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Thank you for staying on the line with me. I know this probably sounds crazy, but I swear to you, something is not right in this house. It doesn't sound crazy, Emma. You called because you were concerned about your safety, and that's exactly what we're here for. Officer Bradley Martinez and Officer Jennifer Cole arrived at Emma's house at 3:54 a.m. I stayed on the line while they made contact with her and began their security check of the residence. Through the radio traffic, I could hear them communicating with each other as they moved through the house, checking each room systematically. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We're in the residence with the homeowner. Beginning sweep of the first floor. Unit 47, copy. Complainant is cooperative and states disturbance is coming from second floor. Copy that, moving to second floor now. I continued monitoring the radio while keeping Emma on the phone. She had let the officers into her house and was waiting in the living room while they conducted their search. Emma, how are you doing? The officers are checking your house now. I'm okay, she said, though she still sounded nervous. They seem very thorough. I just hope they can figure out what's been causing these sounds. After about 15 minutes, Officer Martinez came back on the radio with his report. Dispatch, Unit 47. We've completed a full sweep of the residence. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of any intruders. All windows and doors are secure. The homeowner states she's been hearing sounds from the second floor for approximately 1 week, always during early morning hours. We found no evidence of any disturbance or any source for the reported sounds. This was a fairly typical outcome for this type of call. Often, sounds that seem alarming in the middle of the night turn out to have innocent explanations: settling houses, animals in the attic, or plumbing issues. But as I prepared to close out the call, Emma said something that made me pause. The officer wants to talk to you, she said, and I could hear Officer Martinez taking the phone. This is Officer Martinez. Ma'am, I wanted to ask you something about this address. Have you had any other calls to this location recently? I checked our system, running the address through our database for any prior incidents. No, Officer Martinez. This is the first time we've had any calls to 2847 Canterbury Road. No prior police, fire, or medical responses on record. That's interesting, he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he had found something noteworthy. Because the homeowner is telling us that she's called 911 about this same issue 3 times in the past week, always around the same time of night. She says she's spoken to dispatchers each time and that officers have responded each time. I felt a chill run down my spine. In 14 years of dispatching, I had never encountered a discrepancy like this. Our system logs every call, every dispatch, every unit response. If Emma had called 3 times before, there would be records, incident numbers, officer reports, and documentation in multiple databases. Officer Martinez, I'm showing no record of any prior calls from this number or this address. Are you sure the homeowner is referring to 911 calls and not calls to some other agency? I could hear Officer Martinez speaking with Emma in the background, asking her to clarify her previous contacts with emergency services. She's insisting that she called 911 each time, spoke with female dispatchers, and that officers came to her house and conducted searches just like tonight. She says the officers told her the same thing each time. No signs of intrusion, no evidence of disturbance, house is secure. This was becoming more puzzling by the minute. Either Emma was confused or mistaken about her previous calls, or something very unusual was happening with our emergency response system. Both possibilities were concerning, but for different reasons. Officer Martinez, can you ask Emma if she remembers any specific details about her previous calls? The names of dispatchers she spoke with, badge numbers, or names of responding officers, anything that might help us track down these missing records. After a few moments, Officer Martinez came back on the line. She says the dispatchers never gave their names, and she doesn't remember the names or badge numbers of the officers. But she's very specific about the details. She says each call happened between 3:00 and 4:00 Eastern 4 a.m. The same sounds from upstairs, the same response procedures. She even knew our standard questions and protocols before I asked them. I made the decision to have Emma transferred to a supervisor for follow-up questioning while the officers remained on scene. Something about this call was triggering every instinct I'd developed over 14 years of emergency dispatch work. People don't typically have detailed knowledge of police protocols unless they've had extensive contact with law enforcement, and Emma's familiarity with our procedures was unsettling in ways I couldn't fully explain. Sergeant Lisa Hoffman took over the call at 4:12 a.m. She was our most experienced night supervisor, someone who had seen every type of emergency situation imaginable during her 23 years in public safety. If anyone could make sense of this discrepancy, it would be her. Emma, this is Sergeant Hoffman. I understand you've been experiencing some concerning sounds in your home, and you believe you've contacted us about this issue before. Can you walk me through exactly what happened during your previous calls? I listened in as Emma provided detailed accounts of 3 separate emergency calls. She described speaking with female dispatchers, providing the same address and personal information, and having officers respond each time to conduct security sweeps of her house. Her descriptions were remarkably consistent and included specific details about police procedures that civilians rarely know. The first time I called was last Tuesday night, Emma said. The dispatcher asked me the same questions you asked tonight: my name, my address, whether I was injured or in immediate danger. The officers arrived in about 6 minutes, and they checked every room upstairs. They told me the house was secure, but suggested I might want to have someone check my heating system because sometimes expanding pipes can make unusual sounds. Sergeant Hoffman and I exchanged glances across the dispatch center. Emma's account sounded completely plausible, and her knowledge of our response protocols was accurate down to the estimated response times for her area. What about the second call, Emma? Thursday night, same time, same sounds. This time the dispatcher stayed on the line with me longer, asking about my mental health history and whether I was taking any medications that might cause hallucinations or confusion. The officers who responded were different from the first time, but they did the same search and found nothing unusual. This level of detail was remarkable. Emma was describing standard procedures for ambiguous emergency calls, including the mental health assessment questions that we're trained to ask when callers report experiences that might have psychological rather than physical causes. And the third call? Saturday night. By then, I was getting frustrated because nothing was being resolved. The dispatcher asked if I had been drinking or using any substances, and she wanted to know if I had a history of sleepwalking or night terrors. The officer suggested I contact a home inspector to check for structural issues that might cause settling sounds. Sergeant Hoffman looked at me with an expression that mirrored my own confusion. Emma was describing our protocols with perfect accuracy, but there was absolutely no record of any of these interactions in our system. Emma, I need to ask you something directly. Is it possible that you dreamed these previous calls? Sometimes when we're under stress or not sleeping well, dreams can feel very real and detailed. No, Emma replied firmly. I understand why you might think that, but I was completely awake each time. I remember getting out of bed, going to the kitchen, using the landline to call 911. I remember the conversations, the officers walking through my house, the paperwork they filled out afterwards. Paperwork. That detail made me sit up straighter in my chair. Police officers do complete incident reports for every call they respond to, and those reports are filed in multiple database systems. If Emma's previous calls had really happened, there would be a paper trail that extended far beyond our dispatch records. Officer Martinez, are you still on scene? I asked through the radio. Affirmative, dispatch. Still here with the homeowner. Can you check with records to see if there are any police incident reports filed for this address in the past week? The homeowner is providing very specific details about previous officer responses that aren't showing up in our call logs. While Officer Martinez contacted the Records Division, I began conducting my own search through our backup systems and archived call data. Sometimes technical glitches can cause calls to be logged incorrectly or stored in the wrong database partition. But after 20 minutes of searching through every system I had access to, I found nothing. Officer Martinez came back on the radio at 4:35 a.m. Dispatch, I've checked with records and they're showing no incident reports for this address in the past month. No police responses, no follow-up paperwork, nothing in the system. This was becoming more than just puzzling. It was starting to feel genuinely disturbing. Either Emma was experiencing some form of psychological episode that was causing her to have incredibly detailed false memories, or something was wrong with our emergency response system in ways that I had never encountered before. Sergeant Hoffman, I said, I think we need to expand this search. Can you contact the other shift supervisors and see if anyone remembers taking calls from this address? Maybe there's been some kind of system malfunction that's preventing the calls from being properly logged. Over the next hour, Sergeant Hoffman reached out to supervisors from all 3 shifts, checking to see if anyone had any recollection of previous calls from Emma Hartley or 2847 Canterbury Road. The results were the same across the board. No one remembered the calls. No one had any record of the incidents Emma was describing, and no one could explain how such detailed police responses could have occurred without leaving any documentation. But the most unsettling discovery came when Sergeant Hoffman contacted the phone company to verify the call records for Emma's landline. According to the telecommunications logs, Emma's phone had made only one outgoing call to 911 in the past month. Tonight's call at 3:47 a.m. Emma, Sergeant Hoffman said gently, I've checked with the phone company, and they're showing that tonight was the first time your phone has been used to call 911 in over a month. There are no records of the previous calls you described. Emma's response was immediate and emphatic. That's impossible. I used this same phone from this same kitchen 3 times in the past week. I remember dialing 911. I remember the conversations. I remember everything that happened. The conviction in her voice was absolute. This wasn't someone who was uncertain about her memories or trying to deceive us. Emma genuinely believed that she had made these previous emergency calls, and her belief was supported by remarkably accurate knowledge of our procedures and protocols. Officer Martinez and Officer Cole remained on scene while we tried to figure out what to do next. From a law enforcement perspective, there was no crime being committed and no immediate danger to address. Emma's house was secure, she was physically unharmed, and the sounds she had reported were not currently occurring. But from a human perspective, we had a woman who was clearly distressed and confused about her own experiences in ways that none of us could explain. Emma, I want you to do something for me, I said, taking back control of the call from Sergeant Hoffman. The next time you hear these sounds, before you call 911, I want you to use your cell phone to record what's happening. Take video of yourself in the kitchen, record the sounds you're hearing, and document the time and date. Can you do that for me? I don't have a cell phone, Emma replied. I've never owned one. I know that probably sounds strange for someone my age, but I've just never seen the need for one. This struck me as unusual, but not impossible. Some people do choose to live without cell phones, especially those who work from home or have minimal social connections. But it did eliminate one potential tool for documenting her experiences. What about a digital camera or a recording device? I have an old digital camera somewhere in my closet. I could probably find it and figure out how to use the video function. That would be helpful. And Emma, I want you to know that we're not dismissing your concerns. Something is clearly causing you distress. And whether it's related to sounds in your house or something else entirely, we want to help you figure out what's happening. Officer Martinez and Officer Cole completed their incident report and prepared to clear the scene. They had spent over an hour at Emma's house, conducting the most thorough security check possible, and had found no evidence of any disturbance or intrusion. But as they prepared to leave, Officer Martinez made an observation that would stay with me long after the call ended. Dispatch, one more thing about this call. The homeowner's description of our previous responses was remarkably accurate, but there was one detail that stood out to me. She mentioned that during her second call, the officers who responded were different from the first time. She described one of the officers from that second response as a tall black woman with short gray hair who walked with a slight limp. Why is that significant, Officer Martinez? Because that description perfectly matches Officer Dorothy Washington, who retired from our department 8 months ago after being injured in a foot pursuit. Officer Washington worked night shifts and responded to a lot of residential disturbance calls in the Homewood area. The thing is, there's no way this homeowner should know those details about Officer Washington unless she had actually met her. This revelation sent a chill through the dispatch center that I could feel even through the radio. Officer Dorothy Washington had been a 20-year veteran of the Birmingham Police Department, known throughout the force for her thoroughness and her distinctive appearance. She'd been forced into medical retirement after sustaining a permanent ankle injury during a pursuit, and very few civilians would have had any reason to know her or remember such specific physical details. Officer Martinez, are you absolutely certain about that description? Emma specifically mentioned the gray hair and the limp. Affirmative, dispatch. She described Officer Washington perfectly, right down to the way she favored her left foot when she walked. She even mentioned that the officer was very patient and took extra time to explain the search procedures to her. I felt my hands trembling slightly as I entered this information into the incident report. In 14 years of emergency dispatch, I had developed a healthy skepticism about unusual claims and strange coincidences. But Emma's knowledge of Officer Washington's physical characteristics crossed a line from puzzling into genuinely unsettling territory. Sergeant Hoffman, I think we need to contact Officer Washington directly and ask if she has any recollection of responding to calls at this address before her retirement. Agreed. I'll reach out to her first thing in the morning. But Sarah? If Officer Washington confirms that she never responded to this address, then we're dealing with something that goes beyond simple confusion or false memories. As Officers Martinez and Cole cleared the scene at 5:23 a.m., I found myself unable to shake the feeling that Emma's call represented something far more complex than a routine disturbance report. The combination of missing records, impossible phone logs, and specific knowledge of a retired officer created a pattern that defied conventional explanation. But the call wasn't over yet. Emma had remained on the line throughout the entire incident, and as the officers departed, she asked a question that made my blood run cold. Sarah, can I ask you something? The dispatcher I spoke with during my second call, the one on Thursday night, she had a slight southern accent, and she mentioned that she had been working dispatch for about 14 years. She said her name was Sarah Mitchell, but everyone called her Mitch. Was that you? I stared at my console in complete silence for what felt like an eternity. Emma was describing me with perfect accuracy, including personal details that I rarely shared with callers. My accent, which I had tried to minimize over the years, but which became more pronounced when I was tired or stressed. My 14 years of experience, which wasn't common knowledge outside the department, and my nickname, which was used almost exclusively by my coworkers. Emma, I need you to think very carefully about this. You're saying that during a previous call, a dispatcher told you her name was Sarah Mitchell and that people called her Mitch. Yes, that's exactly what she said. She was very kind and stayed on the line with me for almost 30 minutes. She asked about my family, whether I had anyone who could come stay with me, things like that. It was definitely you, Sarah. I recognize your voice. The impossibility of the situation was overwhelming. If Emma had spoken with me during a previous call, I would have remembered it. Emergency dispatchers develop excellent memories for unusual calls, and a situation involving unexplained sounds and missing evidence would have been exactly the type of incident that stays with you. But more importantly, if I had taken such a call, there would be records, documentation, and reports filed under my operator identification number. Emma, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I have no memory of speaking with you before tonight. There are no records in our system of any previous calls from your number or your address, but you're describing details about me that you couldn't possibly know unless we had spoken before. I don't understand, Emma said. And for the first time that night, she sounded genuinely frightened rather than just confused. If we didn't talk before, then how do I know these things about you? And if the other calls didn't happen, then why do I remember them so clearly? I looked around the dispatch center, seeking some kind of guidance or support from my coworkers. But the night shift was light, with only 3 dispatchers on duty, and both of my colleagues were handling their own calls. Sergeant Hoffman was at her desk, reviewing the incident reports and trying to make sense of the discrepancies we had uncovered. Emma, I think we need to consider the possibility that something unusual is happening that none of us fully understand yet. I'm going to arrange for someone from our department to follow up with you tomorrow, and I want you to write down everything you remember about these previous calls while the details are still fresh in your memory. But what if it happens again tonight? What if I hear the sounds again after you hang up? This was the question I'd been dreading. Standard protocol would be to advise Emma to call 911 again if she felt she was in danger. But given the mysterious nature of her previous experiences, I wasn't sure that traditional emergency response was the appropriate solution. If you hear the sounds again, I want you to try something different. Instead of calling 911 immediately, I want you to go outside your house and see if you can hear the sounds from the street. Sometimes sounds that seem to be coming from inside a house are actually coming from neighboring properties or external sources. What if I can't hear them from outside? What if they really are coming from inside my house? Then call 911 and I'll make sure that the responding officers are fully briefed on everything that's happened tonight. But Emma, I also want you to consider the possibility that you might benefit from speaking with a medical professional about these experiences. You think I'm having some kind of mental breakdown, don't you? The directness of her question caught me off guard. Emma had been cooperative and rational throughout the entire call, showing no signs of delusion or impaired thinking beyond the discrepancies in her reported experiences. I don't think you're having a breakdown, Emma. But I do think you're experiencing something that's causing significant distress, and sometimes medical professionals can help identify physical or psychological factors that might contribute to unusual experiences. I'll consider that, she said quietly. But Sarah, before we hang up, I need to tell you something else. During that second call I told you about, the one where I spoke with you before, you told me something that I haven't mentioned to anyone tonight. What did I tell you? You said that in all your years of dispatching, you had never encountered a case quite like mine. You said it reminded you of something that had happened to you when you were younger, something about hearing voices or sounds that other people couldn't hear. You told me that sometimes the mind creates experiences to help us process trauma or stress that we're not consciously aware of. I felt the room spinning around me. Emma was describing a conversation that had never happened, but she was also describing thoughts and experiences that I had never shared with anyone. When I was 12 years old, following my parents' divorce, I had gone through a period of hearing voices and sounds that seemed to come from empty rooms in our house. My mother had taken me to several doctors, and I had eventually been diagnosed with adjustment disorder related to the family stress. The experiences had stopped after a few months of counseling, and I had never spoken about them to anyone in my adult life. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Have you ever looked me up online, researched my background or personal history? No, Sarah, I don't even own a computer. I know that probably sounds impossible to someone your age, but I've lived a very simple life. I work from home doing bookkeeping for small businesses, and I don't have much contact with technology or social media. The conversation I was having with Emma was moving far beyond the boundaries of a typical emergency call. We were discussing personal experiences and psychological insights that belonged in a therapist's office rather than on a 911 line. But I couldn't bring myself to disconnect the call because Emma's knowledge of my childhood experiences suggested a connection that I couldn't explain or ignore. Emma, the experience you described, the one about childhood voices, that did happen to me. But I've never told anyone at work about it, and it's not information that would be available through any public records or background checks. Then how do I know about it? I don't know, and that's what's making this situation so difficult to understand. Sergeant Hoffman approached my console at 5:45 a.m., holding a printout of Emma's complete call history and incident report. She had been listening to my conversation with Emma and had heard enough to understand that we were dealing with something unprecedented. Sarah, I think we need to contact the mental health crisis team and have them do a wellness check on Emma later today. This level of detailed knowledge about personal experiences and police procedures suggests either an extraordinary coincidence or some form of psychological phenomenon that requires professional evaluation. I agree, but I'm concerned about how Emma will react to a mental health intervention. She's been cooperative tonight, but if she feels like we're dismissing her experiences as purely psychological, she might become uncooperative or stop seeking help when she needs it. We'll handle it sensitively. But Sarah, you realize that everything Emma has told you tonight could be explained by a form of confabulation or false memory syndrome. People experiencing certain types of psychological distress can create incredibly detailed and convincing false memories that feel completely real to them. I knew Sergeant Hoffman was right from a clinical perspective, but her explanation didn't account for Emma's knowledge of Officer Washington's physical characteristics or my own childhood experiences. False memories typically involve generic details and common assumptions, not specific information that would be impossible for a stranger to know. Emma, I'm going to arrange for someone from our crisis intervention team to contact you tomorrow afternoon. They're trained professionals who specialize in helping people work through unusual or distressing experiences. Will you be willing to speak with them? Yes, I think that would be helpful. But Sarah, what happens if these experiences continue? What if the sounds keep happening and I keep remembering things that apparently never occurred? Then we'll keep working with you to figure out what's causing them and how to address them. Emma, you called 911 tonight because you were scared and confused, and that was the right thing to do. Whatever is happening to you, whether it's physical, psychological, or something else entirely, you don't have to face it alone. Thank you for staying on the line with me for so long. I know this probably isn't how you usually spend your night shifts. She was right about that. In 14 years of emergency dispatch, I'd never had a call that lasted over 2 hours or involved such complex and inexplicable circumstances. Most emergency calls are resolved within minutes, with clear outcomes and straightforward documentation. Emma's call was challenging every assumption I had about how emergency situations unfold and how they should be handled. Emma, before we disconnect, I want you to promise me something. If you experience any immediate physical danger, if someone breaks into your house, or if you're injured or threatened in any way, call 911 immediately. Don't worry about the previous calls or the missing records or any of the confusion from tonight. Just call and ask for help. I promise I will. And if you just need someone to talk to about these experiences, if you're feeling scared or confused but not in immediate danger, you can call our non-emergency number during the day and ask to speak with a crisis counselor. Sometimes it helps to have someone to talk through unusual experiences with, even if they can't provide immediate solutions. Emma thanked me again and hung up at 5:52 a.m. I sat at my console for several minutes afterwards, staring at the incident report I had been typing throughout the call. The official documentation of Emma's case would show a routine disturbance call with no evidence of criminal activity and a referral to mental health services. But that summary would miss the profound strangeness of what had actually occurred and the questions it raised about the nature of memory, experience, and reality. Sergeant Hoffman sat down next to me as I finished my report. Sarah, in 23 years of public safety work, I've never seen anything quite like what happened tonight. How are you processing all of this? I honestly don't know. Part of me wants to rationalize it all away and assume that Emma is experiencing some form of psychological episode that happens to involve incredibly specific and accurate details. But another part of me can't shake the feeling that there's something more going on here, something that doesn't fit into our normal understanding of how these situations work. What bothers you most about it? The personal details. Emma knew things about me and about Officer Washington that she couldn't have learned through normal means, and her descriptions of our dispatch procedures were too accurate for someone who had never actually been through our system before. We were interrupted by a call coming in on another line, a medical emergency that required immediate dispatch of paramedics to the other side of the county. The routine nature of the new call felt almost jarring after the complexity of Emma's situation. A reminder that most emergency work involves straightforward problems with clear solutions. But as I handled the medical call and began preparing for the end of my shift, I couldn't stop thinking about Emma Hartley and the impossible conversation we had shared. Her case had challenged my understanding of emergency dispatch work and raised questions about the nature of human experience that I wasn't equipped to answer. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of routine calls and administrative tasks, but Emma's voice kept echoing in my mind. Every time I answered another emergency line, I found myself comparing the caller's story to hers, looking for inconsistencies or impossible details that might indicate similar psychological distress. But all the subsequent calls that night were straightforward. A minor fender bender on Highway 280, an elderly man with chest pains who turned out to be having acid reflux, a noise complaint about a party that had gotten too loud, normal emergencies with normal explanations and normal resolutions. I clocked out at 7 a.m. and drove home to my apartment on the south side of Birmingham. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Emma's whispered voice describing conversations that had never happened and details about my life that she couldn't possibly know. I kept replaying the moment when she had mentioned my childhood experiences with hearing voices, wondering how she could have known something so personal and specific. By 2 p.m., I'd managed only a few hours of restless sleep. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, reviewing the notes I had taken during Emma's call. Reading through them in daylight didn't make them any less puzzling. If anything, the inconsistencies seemed more pronounced when viewed objectively. How does someone have perfect recall of police procedures they've never experienced? How does someone know intimate details about officers they've never met? My phone rang at 3:15 p.m. It was Sergeant Hoffman calling from the department. "Sarah, I wanted to update you on the Emma Hartley situation. I contacted Officer Washington this morning and asked if she had any recollection of responding to calls at that address before her retirement." "What did she say?" "She was very clear that she had never been to 2847 Canterbury Road, either on official business or personally. She's never heard of Emma Hartley, and she has no memory of any calls involving unexplained sounds in residential properties during her final months on the force." This confirmation eliminated any possibility that Emma's memories were based on actual interactions with Officer Washington. But it also deepened the mystery of how Emma could provide such accurate physical descriptions of someone she had apparently never met. Did Officer Washington have any theories about how Emma might have known those details about her appearance? She was as puzzled as we are. She said the description was remarkably accurate, right down to specific details about her injury and the way it affected her walking. Officer Washington suggested that Emma might have seen her around town or at a public event, but she couldn't think of any context where they might have encountered each other. What about the crisis intervention team? Were they able to make contact with Emma? That's why I'm calling. They went to her house this afternoon for a wellness check, but no one answered the door. The neighbors haven't seen her since early this morning, and her car is gone from the driveway. We're not treating it as a missing person case yet, because she's an adult with no apparent mental health commitment issues, but it's concerning given the circumstances of last night's call. The news that Emma had disappeared sent a chill through me that was difficult to explain. People leave their homes for countless routine reasons, and there was nothing inherently alarming about her absence during the day. But something about the timing felt ominous in ways that I couldn't rationally justify. "Sergeant, I know this might sound unusual, but I'd like to drive by Emma's house this afternoon and see if there's anything we missed last night. I keep feeling like there are details about her situation that we didn't fully explore." "Sarah, you're off duty, and this isn't really an active case anymore. Emma made a disturbance call, we responded appropriately, and now it's in the hands of mental health professionals. I understand that, but something about last night is bothering me in ways that go beyond normal job stress. I think seeing her house in daylight might help me process what happened and put it in perspective." Sergeant Hoffman was quiet for a moment, and I could tell she was weighing the wisdom of allowing an off-duty dispatcher to conduct an unofficial follow-up on a closed case. "If you decide to drive by the house, make it a brief observation only. Don't approach the residence, don't attempt to make contact with Emma if she returns, and don't present yourself as conducting any kind of official investigation. And Sarah, if you see anything concerning or suspicious, call it in immediately, rather than handling it yourself." I agreed to her conditions and drove to Homewood that afternoon, arriving at Canterbury Road around 4:30 p.m. Emma's house was a modest two-story colonial with white siding and black shutters, set back from the street behind a well-maintained lawn. The driveway was empty, confirming that Emma was still away from home. I parked across the street and observed the property for about 15 minutes. The house looked completely day-normal in light. No signs of disturbance, no indication of anything that might cause unusual sounds. No evidence of the distress that had prompted Emma's emergency was the call. It kind of quiet residential home that you might pass 1,000 times without giving it a second thought. But as I sat in my car studying the house, I noticed something that Officer Martinez and Officer Cole might have missed during their nighttime security check. The upstairs windows on the side of the house that faced away from the street showed what appeared to be furniture arrangements that seemed oddly positioned. Through the sheer curtains, I could see what looked like chairs or small tables placed directly in front of the windows, as if someone had been using those rooms for surveillance or observation. This observation could have been completely innocent. People arranged their furniture in all sorts of ways, and there were countless reasonable explanations for having chairs positioned near windows. But combined with Emma's reports of sounds coming from upstairs and her mysterious knowledge of police procedures, the furniture placement struck me as potentially significant. I was about to leave when I noticed an elderly woman working in the garden of the house next door to Emma's. She appeared to be in her 70s, moving slowly but purposefully as she tended to a flower bed near her front porch. I decided to approach her and see if she had any insights about Emma or any unusual activity at the house. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said, getting out of my car and walking to the edge of her property. "I'm Sarah Mitchell with the Jefferson County Communications Center. We responded to a call at this address last night, and I was wondering if you might have noticed anything unusual in the neighborhood recently." The woman looked up from her gardening with a friendly but cautious expression. "Oh, you mean Emma's house? Yes, I heard the police cars last night around 4 o'clock. Is everything all right? I've been worried about that girl." "What can you tell me about Emma? Have you lived next door to her for very long?" "Well, that's the strange thing," the woman said, setting down her gardening tools and walking closer to where I was standing. "I've lived in this house for 37 years, and I've never seen anyone named Emma at that address. The house has been empty for about 8 months now, ever since old Mr. Peterson passed away and his children put it up for sale." I felt my stomach drop. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? You're saying the house is empty?" "Empty as can be. No one's lived there since March of last year. I keep an eye on it for the Peterson family, making sure no one breaks in or vandalizes the property. There's a for sale sign in the backyard, though you can't see it from the street because of the hedge." This information contradicted everything about Emma's call. She had provided specific details about living in the house, described her daily routines, and spoken about her kitchen and upstairs bedrooms as if she was intimately familiar with the property. "Ma'am, last night our officers responded to a 911 call from someone who said she lived at that address, a woman named Emma Hartley who reported hearing sounds coming from upstairs." The elderly woman shook her head definitively. "That's impossible. I would have noticed if someone had moved in. I sit on my front porch every evening, and I see everyone who comes and goes on this street. No one has been living in that house for months. Have you ever seen anyone going in or out of the house? Maybe someone checking on the property or showing it to potential buyers? The realtor comes by once a week or so, and there have been a few people looking at it over the months, but no one staying there, and certainly no one who would have reason to be there at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning." I thanked the neighbor and returned to my car, feeling more confused than ever. If Emma's house was empty, then who had made the 911 call? How had she provided such detailed information about the property's layout and described sounds coming from specific rooms? And most puzzling of all, how had she convinced our responding officers that she lived there? I called Sergeant Hoffman immediately to report this new information. "Sergeant, I'm at Emma Hartley's address, and I just spoke with the next-door neighbor. She says the house has been empty for 8 months, and no one named Emma has ever lived there." "That's impossible, Sarah. Officers Martinez and Cole were inside the house last night. They conducted a full security sweep and spoke with Emma face-to-face." "I know it sounds impossible, but the neighbor has lived next door for 37 years and says she would have noticed if someone had moved in. She watches the property for the family and says no one has been staying there. There was a long pause while Sergeant Hoffman processed this information. Sarah, I'm going to contact Officers Martinez and Cole and have them meet you at the house. We need to figure out exactly what happened last night, because either we have a very confused neighbor or we have a situation that doesn't make sense from any angle. Officers Martinez and Cole arrived at Emma's house 20 minutes later, and I could see the confusion on their faces as they approached my car. They had expected to be dealing with a routine follow-up on a mental health case, not investigating discrepancies about whether the complainant actually existed. Officer Martinez, can you walk me through exactly what happened when you arrived at this address last night? We pulled into the driveway at 3:54 a.m. The lights were on in the downstairs windows, and we could see someone moving around inside. We knocked on the front door, and a woman in her late 20s or early 30s answered. She identified herself as Emma Hartley and invited us inside to conduct our security check. What did you observe about the interior of the house? It was clearly lived in, furniture in all the rooms, personal belongings, family photos on the walls, food in the kitchen, clothes in the closets upstairs. Everything you would expect to see in an occupied residence. Officer Cole nodded in agreement. The woman was definitely living there. She knew where all the light switches were. She had keys to the house. She offered us coffee from her own kitchen. There's no question that she was a resident of the property. Did either of you notice anything unusual about the house or about Emma's behavior? She seemed nervous, which was understandable given the circumstances, but she was cooperative and rational. She answered all our questions appropriately and seemed genuinely concerned about the sounds she had been hearing. I looked at the house, then back at the officers. Gentlemen, the neighbor next door says this house has been empty for 8 months. She's been watching it for the owner's family and insists that no one has been living here. Officer Martinez stared at me as if I had just told him that the sun rises in the west. That's not possible. We were inside that house for over an hour. We saw Emma's belongings. We walked through her living spaces. We filled out paperwork using her dining room table. I understand how impossible this must sound, but I think we need to look inside the house again and see what we find in daylight. The officers agreed, though I could see the skepticism in their expressions. We approached the front door together, and Officer Martinez knocked loudly, calling out Emma's name. There was no response from inside the house, and when we peered through the front windows, we could see that the interior was dark and appeared to be empty. Officer Cole walked around to the back of the house and found the realtor's lockbox attached to the back door. After contacting the realty company and obtaining permission to enter the property, we unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was completely empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, no signs that anyone had been living there recently. The rooms that Officers Martinez and Cole had described as being furnished and occupied were bare, with only carpet stains and nail holes in the walls to indicate where furniture had once been placed. "This is impossible," Officer Martinez said, his voice tight with confusion and disbelief. "Last night, this house was fully furnished. There was a couch in this living room, a television on that wall, bookshelves along that window. I remember everything exactly." We walked through each room systematically, comparing what the officers remembered from their nighttime visit with what we were seeing in daylight. Every room told the same story. Officer Martinez and Officer Cole had detailed memories of a lived-in house with furniture, decorations, and personal belongings. But the reality in front of us was an empty property that had obviously been vacant for months. Officer Cole, you mentioned that Emma offered you coffee from her kitchen. Do you remember what the kitchen looked like? Yes, it had white cabinets, a small round table with 2 chairs, a coffee maker on the counter next to the sink, and a landline phone on the wall near the refrigerator. She used that phone to stay in contact with dispatch during our search. We walked into the kitchen, and it was as empty as every other room. No table, no chairs, no appliances except for the basic fixtures that came with the house. There was a phone jack on the wall where a landline might have been connected, but no actual phone. Officers, I need to ask you both something directly. Is there any possibility that you went to the wrong address last night? Could you have responded to a different house and filled out paperwork with incorrect information? Both officers shook their heads emphatically. We double-checked the address multiple times, Officer Cole said. 2847 Canterbury Road. This is definitely where we responded, and this is definitely where we spoke with Emma Hartley. We spent another 30 minutes in the empty house, searching for any evidence that someone had been living there recently. We found nothing. No food in the cabinets, no toiletries in the bathrooms, no clothing in the closets, no personal items anywhere in the house. The property had clearly been vacant for an extended period. But the most unsettling discovery came when we were preparing to leave. Officer Martinez found a business card on the kitchen windowsill that belonged to Dorothy Washington's Security Services. It was Officer Washington's private security company, which she had started after her retirement from the police department. "How is this possible?" Officer Martinez asked, holding up the card. "This is Officer Washington's business card, but she told Sergeant Hoffman this morning that she had never been to this address." I took the card and examined it carefully. It showed Officer Washington's name, her company logo, and contact information for her private security services. The card appeared to be genuine, with no signs of being forged or artificially aged. We need to contact Officer Washington immediately and ask her about this card. Either she forgot about coming to this address, or something very strange is happening here that goes beyond anything we've encountered before. Officer Cole was already on his radio, requesting that dispatch contact Officer Washington and ask her to meet us at the Canterbury Road address. While we waited for her arrival, the three of us continued searching the house for any other evidence that might explain the discrepancies we were uncovering. In the upstairs bedroom that faced away from the street, the room where I had noticed the oddly positioned furniture through the windows, we found something that made all of us stop and stare. There were indentations in the carpet that clearly showed where chairs had been positioned directly in front of the windows, exactly as I had observed from the street. But the indentations appeared to be old, as if the furniture had been removed months ago, rather than recently. These carpet impressions suggest that furniture was positioned here for surveillance or observation purposes, Officer Martinez noted. But if the house has been empty for 8 months, then whoever arranged the furniture this way was the previous occupant, not Emma. Officer Washington arrived at 5:45 p.m., walking through the front door of the empty house with the same slight limp that Emma had described so accurately. Her expression was one of complete bewilderment as she looked around the vacant rooms. "I've never been in this house before in my life," she said definitively. "I don't know how my business card got here, and I have no memory of ever providing security services at this address. Officer Washington, is it possible that you left this card here during your time with the police department? Maybe during a response that you've forgotten about." Officer Washington examined the business card closely, turning it over in her hands. "This card is from my current company, which I only started 6 months ago. If this had been left here during my police service, it would have been a department business card, not a private security card. Someone placed this here recently." The implications hit all of us simultaneously. If Officer Washington's business card was in the house and the card was only 6 months old, then someone had been in this supposedly vacant property within the past few months. But who and why? We searched the rest of the house with renewed intensity, looking for any other signs of recent activity. In the basement, Officer Cole discovered something that changed everything. Behind the water heater, hidden from casual view, was a small recording device attached to the phone line junction box. "This is professional surveillance equipment," Officer Washington said, examining the device. "Someone has been monitoring phone calls to and from this address, probably for months." The pieces started falling into place with terrifying clarity. Emma's detailed knowledge of our dispatch procedures, her familiarity with Officer Washington's appearance, her perfect recall of conversations that had never happened, all of it could be explained if someone had been systematically recording and studying our emergency response protocols. But that explanation raised even more disturbing questions. Who had been conducting this surveillance? What was their purpose? And most importantly, who was Emma Hartley? 3 weeks later, I submitted my resignation from Jefferson County Communications. The Emma Hartley case had been officially closed as an unfounded complaint, but the questions it raised about surveillance, identity, and the nature of our emergency response system continued to haunt me. I never learned who Emma really was or what her true purpose had been. The recording device was sent to the FBI for analysis, but I never received any follow-up information about their investigation. Officer Washington discontinued her private security business and moved to another state. citing personal reasons. Sometimes, late at night, I still wonder if Emma will call again. Not just our department, but others across the country. Testing their systems, learning their procedures, and demonstrating just how vulnerable our emergency services really are to someone with the right knowledge and equipment. The most unsettling part is that I'll never know if the woman I spent 3 hours talking with that night was even real, or just another layer of an elaborate deception designed to expose weaknesses in systems we depend on to keep us safe. In 14 years of emergency dispatch, I thought I had seen everything. Emma Hartley taught me that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some calls are too dangerous to answer.